Hello. Hi guys, welcome back to Guy Set, the guy's guide to what should be talked about. So today's episode is about a big life update in my life, life update for me, which is that I left my first job, which is my job after college, so I quit my job. And I want to start off by saying I didn't quit to do Guy Set full time, at least not yet. I was reached out to, or poached, if you will, by another company. That's not really the point, or that's not really the story I'm going to be sharing. And I more so want to make this episode and talk about why I made the decision to leave, and why it was a super hard decision, and why I originally said no to that other company. But I feel like I'm in a really unique position to share this experience at such a young age that I was reached out to and decided to leave the first job. And you hear people say that, like, you're supposed to stay at a job for 2 years, and I've been with my first job for about a year and a half. So if you're looking at it from like an antiquated or older perspective, maybe I've left a little early from my first job, but I had an opportunity that I felt like I can't turn up, and we'll get into that. But that's the reason that I left that job. So it's all good things. It was never a bad reason, or I wasn't laid off, which I'm very grateful for, and I know a lot of people have been, especially around this time, which sucks, and that's a whole totally different episode that I'm going to be going into than this. But I want to start off by saying I don't like the word quit because it makes me feel like, or sound like, a quitter, which is technically what I did, so I guess that is very fair to say. But I called the episode I Quit My Job because that's much more clickbaity than I left my previous position. But so that's what I went with for the title because it's just more fun. But I want to just start off again by saying, I'm starting off by saying a lot of things, but I'm continuing to say a lot more things. That this episode is not like I'm shitting on my previous company at all. That would be a terrible career move and just very bad optics, especially because I'm putting this out to the world and to anybody, for anybody to hear. And that's also just not how I feel about the previous company. Like, I had a really, really good experience, and I'll talk a lot more about that. But yeah, as I said earlier, I just feel like I have a really awesome opportunity to share this perspective and this experience with you guys and people in their 20s, because I am at such a young age, and this was like, I feel like I'm one of the first of my friends to jump companies or start doing something new. And it's just a cool opportunity and cool experience to talk about this, and I feel like I have a really good platform to do it. So that's what I'm here to do today. So I feel like it's pretty inevitable that people are going to start looking for new jobs at some point. As I said, I actually wasn't looking for a new job, and probably wouldn't have started looking for at least until next year, or maybe at that 2-year mark, because that is kind of the idea that is like perpetuated in your head from when you leave college, or when you're in college, that like your first job you're going to stay with for a couple years. Then if you're unhappy after a couple years, or if you feel like you're not growing or learning after a couple years, then you move companies. But I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore, or that has to be the case as it used to be. And that's fine if that's how some people think. I'm just telling you how I think, that I don't think you need to be that way or think that way. I said I don't think a lot, but I don't think you need to think that way. It's not at all how I feel. No, I don't think you need to feel that way, is what I meant to say. And it's not how I feel. And I didn't leave because I was looking for something, or what was that? What did I say before? Oh, as I said, like, the reason you leave something doesn't have to be because you're unhappy. For me here, and in this scenario, it was because I felt like I wasn't learning and growing as much as I had when I started the position, or at the beginning of the position. And that was the reason I considered the role. So when I was reached out to by this other company, as I said, I wasn't even thinking about leaving. I had some conversations with my company. It was about the year mark, when I didn't get a promotion or a raise, and that's just how that company operates. They don't really do that internally until maybe a year and a half or 2 years, and that's how I guess some companies work. And I didn't like that model or method. I felt like if I had proven or shown that my work was worthwhile and that I was continuing to do more and do higher than was expected of me, that I should be at least considered for a promotion or a raise. So that was a conversation I had with my boss and I call boss at that time, which was a completely new experience for me. I've never had to confront somebody in that way, and I know that a lot of people have very strong feelings about confrontation, and I think at the end of the day, like, nobody likes confrontation. It's not easy. I guess it gets easier with time and with growth and when you do it more and more. But that was my first like real work kind of confrontation, where I asked to have a conversation with my boss and boss at the time, to consider me for a promotion or a raise and kind of present the work that I've done and why I think I deserve that, or why I know I deserve that. And that was like a super awkward situation. Like, I was so nervous going into each of those conversations. I had written down so many bullet points, and when you get to that conversation, and one of my conversations was over Zoom and the other one was in person, and you're not going to bring bullet points into a meeting or have them on Zoom because somebody can tell you're reading, right? So you can memorize or try and remember or think about your points in your head as much as you can, but at the end of the day, when you get in front of that person and you're in that conversation, like, it's you in that moment. What comes out of your mouth is going to come out of your mouth, and you just kind of hope for the best, and the rest is just like shit to the wind. I don't know if that's an expression or not, but in those moments, like, I was super anxious about having those conversations and those sit downs, and I could tell that the way that I knew I was anxious, well, I could tell I was anxious, number one, but number two, like, my eye contact would drop and I wouldn't look at them, and I just felt like I didn't present myself as well as I could when I'm asking or telling them why I think I deserve a raise or promotion. So I think that was a unique experience for me, and the first of definitely many in my lifetime. And I feel like everybody has to go through that first time. I mean, your first time's always special, so you have to go through that for the first time in order to improve and get better at that. But that was my experience, and those conversations ended up going pretty well, which is why I originally said no to the person who reached out to me, the company who reached out to me on LinkedIn. I said to that company, look, I feel like I have a lot of unfinished, I didn't say look. Every time I rephrase this story or talk about it, for some reason I always start by saying look, and I feel like that's never a good thing to say to somebody. You never like look. Like, that's never a good thing to say. So if I say that again, I apologize. I didn't really say that in person or in any of these meetings or confrontations. Now, don't say look. That's like a piece of advice. So I would say, or I responded back to that person, hey, I didn't say hey. I'm just trying not to say look, and now I lost my train of thought. I responded, I feel like I have a lot of unfinished work to do at my current company, and I'm in a place of growth and kind of a lot of things that they told me at that time. And then that company came back. I should actually go back before I go into the negotiation process. When they first reached out to me, I took a Zoom call with the new company. It was with the founder and CEO of that company, and it was a conversation. It was obviously an interview where he asked me, I think, a bunch of questions. He said to me, like, I think you're kind of young for this role. Like, why? Can you prove to me why, or like through your experience, why you're not? And that was one of the questions that I'm remembering right now. But I felt like that was such a good experience to really like work on my interview skills that I haven't tapped into in 2 years, or since I was interviewing for my first and old job. I haven't done interview practice or anything like that in so long. So it felt really good to get in front of somebody where you're in like at the end of the day, it's a pressure position where somebody is analyzing you and seeing if you're a good fit for this position or their job. Even though I was reached out to, I still felt that pressure and that anxiety around that performance on that call. So it was a really good thing to hone in on those skills. So I would recommend, if you are considering looking for a new job or going to take an interview or reaching out to people to interview, like anything with new companies, I'd recommend just working on those skills. And like, one of the ways I prepped for this was I just refreshed my resume. I knew they'd ask for a resume at some point, and I haven't looked at my resume in at least a year and a half at that time. So I wrote out all the responsibilities and everything I've done at the current company and refreshed through that, and I thought about like a recent project that I was working on or heading, and talked about that through with like a friend or a sibling or just yourself in your room before the call. So those were two things that I did. Like I just refreshed myself in my whole resume that I could talk about that. But ultimately, which I thought was kind of cool, was that the whole conversation was about the current job and kind of me and my personal skills. So it wasn't, ultimately a lot of this call was about my current position and having some things about my current job and projects I've worked on and things I've done to help other projects and other people and teams and blah, 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 blah. Like that was the stuff that was like the meat of the conversation. So refreshing on a lot of the stuff I've worked on at this company, which you forget about because you're working on the next thing and then the next thing, and you don't go back or sit down and think about what you've already done and previously worked on. So have that in your back pocket if you're taking any conversations or thinking about it. That was really helpful to me and definitely helped the interview as a whole. But it was just very good to like refresh on my interview skills. So I think I was talking about, when I interjected about the interview, I think I was talking about back and forth with the other job. And at the end of the day, the other company came back with the fact that they were hiring a new person that would be my boss, and I really thought they would act as a really great mentor to me and that I could really learn from and grow with. And that was why I made the decision to leave the first job and join this new company and take the new role. But in the meantime of that decision, like, it was a really hard decision, and it may not have been, but at my first job, like, I made a lot of real friends, and going into work for me was something that was enjoyable. Like, I looked forward to going in every day and going to get lunch with people, and like, it was a very social environment, a very fun place to be and to work at every day, and I genuinely liked going in. And not being able to see those people every day and not having those interactions and those people around me every day was like something that made me sad. And I thought about that a lot, and I was like, I can't not take an opportunity because of the great social environment or the great people I have there, unless it's somebody that I'm really like learning from or growing from, where I didn't really feel like I had that as much. And that was why I decided that it was a great time to go, was because I felt like I had stopped learning and growing in my career and in my position as much as I had in the beginning. Like, I really felt like there was a time, maybe a couple months, where I felt like that for a second, and then I was like, all right, let's see if I feel this way in a month, and let's see if I feel this way in 2 months, and then in 3 months, and maybe I hit that 3-month mark, and I was like, okay, now I'm really feeling this way, and I don't feel like I'm growing as much as I should be. And I know it's a super unique experience to have something I look forward to going into every day. Like, work was a highlight. Like, it wasn't something that I dreaded going into. And I know a lot of people don't have that, and I'm very, very grateful that that was my first experience and my first job in the workforce, because that's very, very, very unique. And I'm very grateful and privileged to have that experience. So I want to acknowledge that, because I genuinely feel that way. But that is, in my experience, what made it really hard, was that I liked going in. I really did. But as I said, like, I didn't feel like I was learning or growing. And I was cleaning out my computer, my work computer, in my last couple days there, and I always write like notes to myself. So I was looking through all my notes in the notes app on my computer, and I always write little notes to myself that I never write like why I wrote that or where it came from, but I'll just put like a note down and usually never look back at it. But if I do, like, this experience with this note was very cool. So I found this note that really like cemented my confidence in the decision to leave this first opportunity for the next one. And I'm gonna read you the note. I wrote it down to read to you, or I copy and pasted it. And it says, quote, "Look up. Do the people above you have a role you see yourself in? If not, do what you can in your role to get yourself somewhere else." And I don't know what that fully means, or why I wrote that, or why I had it. I do. That's not true. I know why I wrote that. Well, maybe I don't know why I wrote it, but I at least know what it means. I think it means that, like, and the fact that I'm like I'm trying to think of what my previous self thought when I wrote that. I think I wrote that at a time when I felt like I wasn't growing, and I've said that a bunch of times, so I'm gonna stop saying those words. It's annoying. But I felt like the people above me weren't in positions that I necessarily wanted to take on, because at the end of the day, when you get promoted, it's to that role and that role and that role. Like those are the roles you're promoted in. You're in that pipeline, and I felt like I didn't see myself wanting to take on those roles, and I didn't feel like that was the career path I wanted. And maybe that was from a conversation with my boss where she was like, well, think about what you want to do or where you want to go. And maybe it was around the promotion time. But that to me was a good indicator that this current position was a great start, but it couldn't be where I stayed because I didn't see myself wanting to take the positions of the people above me. And when I said to myself, like, set yourself up in this role to do the next thing or something like that, whatever that note said, I think that meant, like, do all you can in this role to just prove yourself and show that you're a good worker and you have a good work ethic, and prove to yourself that you're productive and just a good worker, and that if you set your mind to something, that you can jump somewhere else and try something different. Because, I mean, everybody can. Like, if you want to switch something, we're not too old. You're never too old to switch something or do something different. But it was just a good, like, maybe note to myself, a reminder that where I currently am wasn't where I want to stay or want to be, and that was a good time to look. So now I want to talk about how I did it and how I left the first company for the second company, or how I... Let me phrase this better. I wanted to leave my first company on a really good note, and that was really important to me, to just leave the team and my boss and people I really respect and look up to, and have looked up to for a bunch of years now. I started with this company as an intern, and then grew into a full-time employee, and then was asked to come back as a full-time employee, and have been there ever since. So I've known a lot of these people since I was in college, and I've really looked up to them and respect them. I still respect them, and still look up to them. And I wanted to leave on really good terms, and I know leaving a job is really hard and can be very easy to burn a lot of bridges with some people when they think you're leaving for a better opportunity, or they think you're too good for them, or they hear something like you don't think they're learning or growing, they put that on themselves, and I don't think that's necessarily true. And I mean, each experience is very different, and everybody's reason to why they leave is very different. But in my experience, when I say, like, learning and growing, it's about learning and growing again. This episode should just be called Learning and Growing. But it's more about that I didn't see myself wanting to take the positions above me, and I didn't think that career path was for me, and that's the ultimately reason why I left, and I wanted a change and a new opportunity, which can be construed for a lot of other things, and people can see it for however they see it. But to me, I wanted to keep the relationships above me intact. So how I left, and I have never heard anybody else talk about this. I haven't, like, heard this on a podcast or anything. So again, I feel like I have a unique opportunity to just kind of, like, spill my secrets of this and spill exactly how I went about this. Because there is no playbook. Like, there's no rules for how to leave well, or how to keep the relationships above you with the people that you respect, while also leaving and telling them that you want a better or new opportunity. Like, that's a very hard thing to balance, and that's a lot of different things to do at once. And I spoke to a ton of different people. Like, I talked to my family members, I talked to friends, I talked to old bosses, I just talked to so many people. But at the end of the day, it's like I said, when you're in that room with the person, it just comes from you, and all the people's ideas and whatever everybody said kind of flies out the window, because it's just you, and it's the stuff you prepared, but it's really how you want to keep the relationship. And I think if you're genuine and you come off as genuine, they'll know it, because that shines through more than anything else, more than the corporate speak, and more than the sentences you prepared or the bullet points you've prepared. Like, if you genuinely mean what you're saying, I think that comes through, and I hope that comes through. It's not everybody's experience, and it's not always, like, the business world, but that's how I felt, at least. So how I left, and I want to get my notes from this because I want to tell you what I did. I wrote some bullet points about it. So I made a list of people to tell before and after I told the company. The people I told before, and I was given advice not to tell anybody before you leave, before you tell your boss or the company that you leave, because if it gets back to the boss or back to the company that you're leaving before you tell them, like, that's terrible news it's a bad look. But I have a couple people that I really trust and trusted at the time, that I wanted to tell them that I was leaving. They're my friends now, and they're like genuinely friends. So I knew they wouldn't say anything if I really asked them not to. And they kept that true, at least to my knowledge. So I told a couple people before, and then I had a list of people to tell right after I told my boss and the company. They're kind of synonymous, one and the same at that point. Because I wanted it to come from me, and I didn't want anything to get back to somebody that I was leaving without me telling them. So a couple people that I felt like I really needed to tell myself and wanted to tell the full story and why I left and yada yada. So I also made a list of people to email after I tell the company, because in the off chance they asked me to leave right then and there, which I learned is a possibility, and they can just ask you to, like, thank you so much for your time. They can ask you right then and there to leave because you have access to data and you have access to knowledge that somebody who's leaving the company maybe shouldn't have. So I made a list of the people that I wanted to tell and thank for their guidance and whatever the fuck. I'll read you that whole email after in a second. I talk about the conversation with my boss, because I also want to tell you the bullet points that I had in my head with my boss. Because again, I told you I really wanted to leave on a good note. So I didn't have a meeting scheduled, or I had a meeting scheduled that was like a normal going over what we were doing that week meeting. And I wanted to give more than 2 weeks notice. You don't have to give more than 2 weeks notice, but that just felt to me like it would be helpful for the way I wanted to end things. I learned that you have to give 2 weeks notice and like a proper resignation email, notice, which sounds so intense. But those are just like the two things you have to do. But I wanted to give a little bit more than that to give my boss like time to understand and work together to just like leave the relationship on a good note. So these are the bullet points that I used for that conversation, and I recommend maybe putting like a 15-minute time slot on the calendar asking for like a chat, because that gives them some sort of warning that something is coming. I didn't do that, and that's something I wish I had done differently. I went into a meeting that I had already scheduled with my boss and just said, hey, like, I know this isn't what you're expecting right now, but I have something to tell you. And that person knew right then and there what was about to happen. But here's the notes that I had written, and obviously I didn't read them, as I said earlier, like, everything can fly out the window, but I remembered a couple of these bullet points. So I wrote, I have something I want to tell you, dash. And then I received a really exciting offer that at this point I can't turn down. I've been loving my work here, X company, and originally turned them down, but the offer became too good to pass up. I wanted to give at least a 3-week notice because working here has meant so much to me, and I want to make this transition as smooth as possible because I know timing is never good. This feels like the next best step in my career, and I appreciate your support and understanding in this decision. So those are the bullet points that I had prepared, and on my walk to work that morning, I was running through them like again and again in my head. Like, it felt like I was memorizing for a test. But in the moment, I changed a couple of the words. Like, I knew what I wanted to say, and I knew like the gist of the message. And maybe the ending of like, I appreciate your support and understanding was like a bit too blunt, and I maybe didn't say that in the moment, but I said like, I appreciate you understanding that I want to make this decision, and obviously I changed some of the words around, as I said. But that initial conversation went so much better than I thought it was going to go. My boss understood and said like, I appreciate you telling me, and I hope the experience here has been really good. And I also added that like, I want to build out and finish what I was doing at the time, and make sure that the project was finished by the end of the year, so that it would set the company up for success until they found somebody else new, because finding somebody new, I didn't realize, and now I know, takes a really long time. It's not a quick process. It's usually like a month or two process. That sounds quick. But I wanted to make sure that they were set up but until somebody else was found to fill my position. And I think offering that was a really, at least I hope, was a nice way to end things and a nice way to go, which the boss took me up on, and I thought was really just helpful for the team and just finishing the project as a whole. So I gave myself that extra week to work on the project and finish it out. And I think that's a good way to end things if you want to end it on a good note. So that's what I did, and I recommended that. I hope it worked. I'll never know if the boss is happy with me or if not, but I hope, and I feel like I left on a good note, and that's enough for me, honestly. And then I told the big boss as well, and that conversation also went really nicely. And I was so worried that these conversations were going to go the exact opposite way, and I don't know how they can, because in this point I have the upper hand of the conversation. Like, I'm the one leaving if it doesn't go well. Like, okay, like there's nothing really I can do. But the fact that they also reciprocated it very nicely meant that maybe the relationship was really what did end up on a good note, which I hope. So I also wanted to tell you about. So at the end of the day, I feel like I left on good terms, and in my mind, I hope so. I really do, but I never know. So telling everybody else, telling my work friends was obviously like another hard thing to do. I was really awkward about it and very bad about it, and I was just, every time I told somebody, I'd be like, hey, I'm leaving, and they'd be like, oh, okay, like, see you tomorrow. Like, what? Okay. And I was like, no, I'm like leaving Lemonade, and they'd be like, oh, fuck, okay. And then like I would tell them the whole like experience and the being reached out to and the conversations and blah blah blah. So I mean, it was always kind of awkward, and I was always pretty blunt about it. I don't think it's ever like an easy thing to say to somebody, especially somebody that you care about, and you're gonna be sad that you're leaving that person. But on the friends note, like, if you're friends with these people and you really are friends with these people, like, you're gonna stay friends with them. You're not leaving them. Like, they're not leaving you just because you've changed jobs or changed careers. And I mean, maybe now you have more to talk about. You have more things to share, and you now have 2 different work dramas to talk about. So I feel like I'm leaving with a lot of the connections I have intact. At least I hope, as I'm saying again. I'll see shortly. But I want to tell you the email I wrote out to send to a bunch of people. I sent this to like everybody on my team, a couple other teams. I think I sent this email to like maybe 50 or 60 people, which is maybe a ton. And maybe I just sent it to people that like don't give a shit at all, but they got an email from me. And my sister helped write this email, and this was based off of her she left her job like 2 years ago, and this was based off of her email. So I want to share that email with you, and it's a very like generic email, and feel free to take these words and use them if you have to send something like this. But I think it's helpful to have a model for this. This is why I've shared a lot of like what I said to my boss at first, which is why I'm sharing this and why I'm sharing the other tips and things I did. Because there is really no model or guidebook on how to do this. This is something that like isn't talked about, especially for guys in their 20s. Maybe this is something that like older people in business give their advice on, but I've never heard this advice from somebody our age or somebody in their 20s, which is why I'm really excited to be able to talk about it like this and so openly, and give you advice and things that I've used and I think worked nicely, and you can take as well. So what I said in that email was, wow, dash, which is my sister's ad. I like that. Nice little touch. Oh, also the subject was thank you. I'm really bad at subjects, and I think that's also something I'm always wondering about, so I'm giving you as many details as I can. The subject was thank you, exclamation, exclamation. Maybe you're not an exclamation guy or girl. Maybe you are. Maybe you want to add more. Maybe you want to add less. I accidentally lowercased the Y in thank you, and that really sat rent-free in my head for like an hour or two, but then I was like, ah, fuck it, whatever. So subject was thank you, exclamation, exclamation. I said, wow, I can't believe today is my last day at X company after X years. As you may know by now, I'm joining X company. As I haven't practiced this, as you can tell. While I'm sad to leave the incredible team here at X company, I am really excited to see where my next adventure takes me. Thank you for making the past few years so memorable, and I will take the lessons I've learned here with me in all my future endeavors. Please don't be a stranger, dash dash. Let's stay in touch. I'm wishing you all the best at X company and beyond. All the best. My name, Josh Felgois. I also added my email, my cell phone number, and my LinkedIn. I also added a link to this podcast, not this episode specifically, but if you're here from that email, hello, hope you're doing well. You can feel free to add whatever you want there. I'm just comfortable enough with the people I sent it to give them that personal information, and if they want to stay connected or stay in touch. So that was the email. It's a very simple, basic, modern outline of. It's very, what I mean to say with all of those words is that it's a very generic email, and you could have written that yourself, but I'm just sharing what I've done in this experience because I feel like that's really helpful, and I would want to hear this if I was leaving or considering leaving another company. So that's why I'm doing it and sharing all the details of it. So I wanted to just end by kind of saying what I've learned in this whole process of the past couple months of making the decision to leave my first job and joining a new job was that, one, I realized that everybody is always kind of keeping their eye out for a new opportunity. Even if you're not actively looking, I feel like I learned that a lot of people, I mean, maybe everybody is a big generalization, but a lot of people are always looking or always kind of on the prowl for something new, even if it's not active, something I've just learned. I also learned for me that the time was right to leave. You've heard me say this a ton of times, but the time was right to leave this current position when I didn't feel like I was growing in my responsibilities and my capabilities. So to me, the projects were staying kind of stagnant and the same. I didn't feel like I was learning, I said it again, that much more than I had been, and I didn't feel like there was somebody to grow from or have a real mentor that I could see myself taking their footsteps or taking their position at some point. So that's why, to me, that's when I think it's time to look for something new and seriously look for something new, not just passively be scrolling if you feel like you're not, as I said again, growing and learning. And then the last thing was this whole thing just kind of opened my eyes to how nice and how lucky I was to have this first job and this first experience. I learned a ton. You heard me say learning, but I for a long time I was learning a ton, and it's really set me up for a new position. I've made so many amazing connections through that company, and genuinely made friends that I never thought I would have from a job. I didn't think that was a thing that people could do, is make real friends from a job. So it's very nice to have had a job or an experience that is so hard to leave or say goodbye to. And I know that a lot of people don't always feel that way, so I feel very grateful about that, and maybe that if you don't feel that way, that it's a good sign or a good tell that it's time to start looking somewhere else. And if you are looking somewhere else, come back to this episode and hear how I did it or why I did it, and maybe it'll inspire you or help you in your journey. I think if I had something like this, or an episode or a podcast episode, or someone to sit down and give me their full rundown of why they left a company, how they left a company, and details of exactly what they did and who they talked to and how they talked to that person, that would have been so helpful for me. So I hope that this episode is that for you, and you can come back to this episode if you're ever in that position. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a first job is a first job. It's not supposed to be some amazing experience. I mean, it's supposed to be a great experience, but it's not supposed to be this worldly growth time that you feel like you've found yourself and found your career and everything in. If anything, I think it's a great time to start figuring out where you want to go and what you want to do, and learn maybe not what you want to do and the things you want to steer away from, which is, to me in this case, something that has helped me a lot. I also think it's a great time to make a lot of connections and meet a lot of people and connect with everybody on LinkedIn and keep these connections. I hope, and I think I'll keep a lot of the connections I've made at the first company, and I plan to, and that just takes a lot of effort, and it's more people to now see and make plans with and keep in touch with, which I'm going to do an episode on. That's not maybe next week or the week after. I'm doing an episode on keeping in touch, because that's something that I know a lot of people struggle with. It's also an episode that somebody asked about and was recommended to me to do, and I love the idea for that. So that's gonna be one of the episodes coming up in shortly, next couple weeks. Excuse me. Water. So look out for that episode. I'm excited about it, and I think it will also be a really helpful reminder for me when I'm thinking about staying in touch with a lot of people from my previous job, because now I have that on top of like college friends and a lot of other things, and it's overwhelming to think about keeping all these connections. So look out for that episode. I hope you like this one. I hope I didn't overshare too much. I don't think I did. I'm leaving it feeling like I did it justice. I hope I did. I've been thinking about doing this episode for a little while now, since I was back and forth on the decision, and I knew I couldn't do it then, because that would be weird if somebody from my company heard it and they were like, oh, he's thinking of leaving. I couldn't do that. So I knew I had to wait until after I left to do this. And I feel like, and I went back and forth about doing it because I didn't want anybody to get the wrong idea from it, if it's from my previous company or if you're listening to it from an, I didn't want anybody to get the wrong idea in my career in general. But the why behind this episode and why I'm sharing this experience with you is because, as I said, I don't feel like there's enough of this out there, and there's not enough transparency into this part of career advice. Like, leaving a position for a new position is a very hard balance. It's a very awkward thing to do. And it's a lot of, like, you feel like you're a double agent. Like, you feel like you're fucking Hannah Montana, balancing between knowing that you're leaving one job while still working for the one job, also kind of crafting your response and your, like, public statement to that current job, while also, like, working behind the scenes and interviewing with the next job. Like, it's a very weird experience, and it kind of fucks with your mind. And something that really helped me through this whole experience, I've talked about journaling a ton, but I wrote a lot every night about this. And I looked back before I did this episode into a lot of those notes, and that's where a lot of the advice and stuff came from. And that just kind of helped keep me grounded through this whole thing, because it's a lot. Like, it's a fucking mind trip that you're interviewing behind the scenes, and it just feels like you're, like, behind everyone's backs, and, like, as I said, you feel like you're like Hannah Montana, like living like a double life. So it's weird, and if you're in this experience right now, or thinking of interviewing with other companies, or thinking of like, or you're gonna go in this experience soon, and you're hitting a 2-year mark, or you're hitting that 1.5 or year, and you're like, I'm not happy in my current position, or I'm not feeling like I'm hitting my potential and learning and growing, and you want to start doing this, I hope this episode was helpful for you. I really do. Okay, next week's episode is Guy Set Toolkit number 3, which is my version of an Ask Me Anything or an AMA. So you guys send in questions to me and I answer them. They're some of my highest rated episodes and the ones that people listen to the most, because I just go off of random questions that you guys ask me, and it's never in an order or anything, and it's just off the fly what I think in that moment. I don't really look at them after I write them down, and I just say what I think on here, and they're very fun episodes. So that's next week. You can send in any questions you have that you want me to answer on that episode to my DMs on Instagram or TikTok at TheGuySet, 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 or to my email, josh@guyset.com, josh@guyset.com. Or you can leave a little submission on my website, guyset.com. There's a thing that says, like, what should be talked about, and you can put it right there too. I'll check that as well. So that'll be next week, Guy Set Toolkit number 3, which are just super fun episodes. And as I said, I hope you like this episode. I feel like I hope I didn't say, like, too much. I shared a ton, and that's the point. And yeah, if you like this episode, I really hope you did. Please like, subscribe, leave a review, give it 5 stars. You can also now on Spotify, if you're listening there, you can write something in the box below. It says, like, what do you think of this episode? I'd appreciate that. Yeah, cool. And yeah, send any questions, anything you want me to talk about, anything that should be talked about, to my email, especially for next week's Guy Set Toolkit episode. And you can send those to my DMs or my email, as I already said. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys next Tuesday. See you guys. Reed, yo, chillin'. I'm all done.